What up, dudes? Welcome back to Duty's Daggers. We have a subject we are talking about today. I want to kind of explain and clarify um, what makes a good sharpening choil and what makes a bad sharpening choil. Um, when I was first getting into knives for actually quite a while, I didn't quite get what reviewers were talking about when they were saying this was a good sharpening choil or a bad sharpening choil or a good plunge grind or bad plunge grind. And the two are kind of related to each other. So a sharpening choil is this area in here that's cut out to make it easier for you to sharpen all the way back to the very end of your edge. You can see some knives have very large ones, like this one. Some have smaller ones. But most knives have them, except Spyderco. A lot of Spydercos don't even have them. Their edges just end into this little nub right here. That's just how they choose to do it. That makes sharpening back there a little bit more difficult. So that's the sharpening choil. Now the plunge grind, or plunge line, I call it the plunge grind, is this line right here. That line right there. And you can see you have the surface of your bevel, and then it slopes up, and it meets where you get the flat part of your blade stock. This is the flat. That's the thickness of your blade stock, and it slopes up and meets the flat right there. What causes that is when you're holding up your knife to the belt sander, you got a big belt in front of you going up and down this way. We can use this box as an example. Yeah. So the belt's going up and down this way. You got your your knife without it doesn't have the bevel yet. It's just blade stock. It's all this thick. You're holding it up at a little bit of an angle this way to get it thinner down here, thicker up here. Now what creates this line is right here. You're grinding, grinding, grinding. Stop right there. That's where that belt, sanding belt, is stopping. It has to transition at some point from where you're grinding down here down to the thin edge to the full thickness blade stock. So grind, grind, grind. You're stopping right there. That's what creates this area right here. The plunge grind. Now, the plunge grind is indirect relationship to the sharpening choil because they end right in the same area. So you have the plunge grind that comes down. It usually ends right in the middle of the sharpening choil. Now, depending on where that ends in the sharpening choil determines whether it's going to be a bad or good sharpening choil. Let's look at a bad one first. This is the Kaiser Mini Beglighter. So you can see they put almost like a little sharpening choil area in here, but it's behind the plunge line. So that's useless. I tried to kind of draw this out to better help you guys understand. So the first one here is if we're looking down, our eyeballs up here, we're looking down onto the sharpening choil. This is what you're going to see. This is the full thickness of the blade stock. These are your plunge grind line, this one right here, and then it slopes down, and here's your edge thickness. This is your thickness behind the edge right here. Now, this is what a bad sharpening choil looks like. This is this is kind of an exaggerated sharpening choil, but this line right here, right there, is this line right here. Okay? Now, this dotted line is where that plunge grind begins to slope up to meet the blade stock full thickness material, the flat right here. So you can see it's not a right angle. It doesn't come and then there's a corner and then goes up and then over. It's a gradual slope up. You can see it right there. So it's a radius in there. Now, that's this colored in area right here. That's what I'm trying to depict as the slope. So the dotted line is where it begins to come up. This full line is where it ends, right here. And this in between is that slope up. So hopefully that is making sense. We can look at a couple other examples. And sometimes it's kind of harder to see the slope. Here you can see it's right in there. This one's actually not bad. You get a little bit of room. Basically what you want is, this is the edge termination right here. The edge is ending right here, right? You want the beginning of that slope up to be back this way, behind it, because it starts to get thick right there. It starts to get thick. Now, when you're coming along with your stone, if you reach this area in here where it starts getting thick, it's going to mess up your edge bevel. You're going to get a weird little spot in there. So you want to be ending your stone before you get to this dotted line where that plunge grind begins to come up and get thick right in here. Here's an example of a good sharpening choil and plunge grind. The dotted line here where it's starting to slope up is back behind the edge termination. So this in here, you have all this life to sharpen away without getting into this yucky area where we get the slope and we're getting thick. I'm hoping that's making sense. I'm doing my best. Here's an example of an okay one. And it's easy to see the slope here. See the shadow right there? See how it's a darker shade here, a lighter shade here? That's the shadow right there, and you can see the slope up. That slope up begins right here and ends right there, right? This area right in here, that's the slope. Now here's our edge termination. It's pretty close, but it is in front of that. So we do have this little area right in here that is, that's our real estate for sharpening away, right in here. It's pretty easy to see on this knife. So you can see not a whole lot of room, but our edge termination is here. Our plunge line or grind begins right here. The slope begins there, slopes up to there. That's the slope. That's the thick, yucky part. So hopefully that is making sense. Sometimes it's harder to tell, like on this one, you can't really tell very easily where that slope is beginning. It might be getting kind of thick right in here at our edge termination. Kind of hard to tell, but it's not bad. This one, again, is an example of just, there's really no sharpening choil here, now that I look at it. There's no cutout. It almost looks like this might be, but it's not. There's our edge termination right there, and that is also where our plunge line begins to slope upward, right there. So as soon as we sharpen some material away, this edge termination is going to be up in here, in the thick area. What does that look like when someone tries to sharpen that area and it begins to get thick? Well, you get something like this. Some people call it a smile. You can see the coating of the blade has rubbed off right here. And this isn't even that bad, but you can see that edge bevel has gotten thicker. See, it's like, oh, it's consistent, boom, it starts getting thick right here. That's because the plunge grind is starting to slope up right about here. So our edge termination is very close to the plunge grind. There's no real cutout. I'm assuming somebody probably sharpened this, and you can see what happens. It gets thick right there. This is not a very good plunge grind right here. You can kind of see it better on this side too. Started getting thick. The stone starts to hit right up here, and that's what happens. Yep, there you go. So hopefully that made sense. If you guys have any questions, let me know in the comments. I will gladly answer any questions. I'm really trying to explain this in the right way, correctly and clearly. I don't know how well I'm doing. Again, this is an example, an extreme example of a very good plunge grind. This plunge grind has a very gradual slope, but you can tell it's right around in here somewhere where it begins to slope up. But regardless, it could be anywhere in here. We don't care because our edge termination is way, way down here. So we probably have somewhere around like this much area to sharpen. And you would never, ever sharpen away that much material. I mean, unless you had the knife like passed down from generation to generation, maybe you could. But that's crazy, you know. So, what am I forgetting? I guess we'll just go over it quickly one more time. Bad sharpening choil, where our edge termination is behind this imaginary dotted line where that plunge grind begins to slope up and get thick. Bad. Good. Edge termination is in front of, this way, in front of the imaginary line where our sharpening choil begins to slope up and get thick. This area right in here, it's thick. There you go. Again, if you have any questions, let me know. It's, you know, it's surprising that more companies don't make sure to nail this. You know, it's one thing if it's a Spyderco and there's not a sharpening choil. They just have their edge termination is down here. It just ends abruptly, right? It's one thing if you have a knife like this where there's no sharpening choil. But if you're going to have a sharpening choil, why would you make a bad one? You know, why would you make a sharpening choil and then have it not be useful in sharpening? You know what I mean? I'm trying to, you know, the Royal here does have a little bit of room. Which is the worst one? This one doesn't even have a sharpening choil. That one's decent. Let me see. How's this one? It's decent. 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 Yeah. Anyways, so that's what I mean. Why would you even put in a sharpening choil if your plunge grind is not going to complement the sharpening choil and work together and create, you know, some life in your blade that you can feel good about taking it to some sharpening stones, and you're not worried about hitting anything. You're not worried about messing up, you know, creating an ugly spot. And you want to have a nice, consistent edge bevel all the way back to your, you know, the full edge, back to your termination. So that's it. I hope I didn't sound really dumb. This is my understanding of it. Again, if I'm like, I'm not wrong, but if I forgot something or if I am unclear about something or whatever, just let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching, dudes. Please like the video before you head out. I'd appreciate it. That's it, dudes. Later.